We can start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start. So we have this joint event here. On one hand, we have a small seminar of new institutional or institutional economics course, and then we have a job talk by Neely combined. Neely is teaching two sets of macroeconomics this term. So he's a visiting lecturer here at the Stern Business School. She did her PhD at the University of Virginia and moved to Thailand last year. And she has already actually presented her research that was published in the World Development in January at the Estonian Economic Association annual meeting. But this time she's going to present a different paper, which is still about Brazil and a highly relevant question about trade and property rights. So please, floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm Nivi, and today I'm going to try to answer the question whether property rights establishment can solve this tragedy of commons under free trade, specifically looking at Brazil. So if we look at the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest, the annual loss is on the left and the cumulative loss is on the right. And really, if you look at the cumulative loss since 1990, it has grown tremendously. And of course, the rate of deforestation has its ups and downs, but it's undeniable that we are continuously deforesting the Amazon rainforest. And we can pinpoint a couple of reasons for that. So one of them is this increasing world demand for timber. So as we can see, since 1990, that has also steadily increased. And the second big thing is the meat production. So people have been consuming a lot more meat, for which you need land, which means we deforest the rainforest. So the question that I'm asking is whether property rights can halt this resource loss. So this is not such a straightforward answer. I mean, though we know the first story is the one that we think about when we think of theory, right? If we establish property rights, we're correcting this market failure. So people should, care about the future of their land, and so they will optimally harvest, and this should reduce deforestation. But in fact, what happens in many of these developing countries in the immediate term is that property rights establishment gives them security over their land, so they can use the rights to get title and loans. So that can increase land investment, which can actually increase deforestation. So the same farmer has a choice of either saving the trees or producing, cattle or other agricultural products on his land. So that's what I first explore theoretically. So first I, extend a dynamic model. So this was already a model about how a small open economy acts with resource loss. So what I do is I add this property rights dimension. So first, we start in the second best world where there's no property rights, and then we add property rights and I see what happens. And of course, the two channels do come into play in the model too. So on the one hand, I find that the land allocated to forests in the long run is, there's more land allocated to forests in the steady state. So that's this tragedy of commons reversal. That's our good story. But on the other hand, the rate of deforestation can increase or decrease. So until we reach the steady state, we might actually end up deforesting at a faster pace, though we have the rights to the land. And this is again because of this agricultural productivity boost. So once I do show you a little bit of the theory, I'll put up the equations, but mainly I just do it so you can look at the phase diagram. After that, I'm going to talk about the empirical aspect of my paper. So I studied this new land titling program called Terra Legal, where they started titling land in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil from 2009. And in fact, it was ongoing as of 2017, but I only have data until 2012, and contacting the people there did not yield me more data. So the program started getting a lot of bad press, so they cut off all the researchers. So land rights to squatters in the Amazon, this was an actual public to private transfer, and I based this on the assumption that the property rights was granted slowly, and this is exogenous to wood exports. So this is in different municipalities. Rollout happens at different times. So I specifically look at empirically the export of wood commodities and then the export of agricultural commodities. And for this, I use confidential municipal level quarterly data. So this is a customs data which is available at the municipal product and quarter level. And it used to be available in Brazil's Ministry of Trade website where anyone could download it. So when I started my research, I downloaded it. And then that summer, they decided that it's no longer available for researchers. So now my data ended up being confidential. They couldn't prevent me from using it since I already downloaded it. But now no one else can download it. You have to contact the ministry and they probably will not grant you access. So in that respect, I was lucky. And this is why you don't procrastinate in your downloading your data, I guess. So I rely on this exogenous phased rollout from the titling program. And what I find is that in the immediate aftermath, so this, as soon as the treatment happens, as soon as you get property rights, there's a 48% increase in quarterly wood export value. So this agricultural channel effect is pretty strong. And I find that this effect intensifies over time and peaks at the third quarter. So this kind of supports the story that they're cutting off the land in order to do other productive things on it. So let me get, so to the best of my knowledge, like this is one of the first empirical results on what happens to property rights establishment and trade. And I also have good data in order to do it. So this is very minute level of data. And in the theoretical aspect, this extension of going from no property rights to property rights is a novel extension. So although I use a model someone else created, this is the first time we're considering this in a dynamic small open economy framework. So I am going to now get started with my model. So in the dynamic model of competing land use, what I start out with is I assume that we start with a lot of land just covered in forest, and then there's a representative agent, and he's endowed with 1 unit of land. Okay, in the beginning of time, you can think about it. What does the lack of property rights mean? That means that every time, in every instant in time, he has this threat of appropriation, which is this variable gamma or parameter. So he has some threat that he's going to lose the land, and that is going to affect his wealth maximization. Because I'm dealing with a small open economy, I take world prices as given. Of course, we can argue that perhaps Brazil is not really a small open economy, but the only thing that will happen is, the prices will get influenced and it'll make my math more complicated. So I make the simplifying assumption just so that we get some results. And I also have 3 products in this model. So the timber from land clearing R, so this is what we talk about when we talk about wood. So when you talk about the forest product itself, we can think of that as a service product. So maybe it's like you get paid in order to keep forests on your land because it provides the service of carbon sequestration and other things. So this product F is what is a sustainable forest good. But the R, the timber we get from land clearing, is just when we cut down the trees. And of course, we have the agricultural product A, which I normalize to 1. So at any given moment, the farmer has to observe how much land he has, which is covered in forest, and he looks at how much income he gets from the forest sector and from the agriculture sector, and then he can make his decision. And he has to decide on this clearing rate. So how much land am I going to convert for agriculture? So this brings him some income, which is the price times how much land I clear, but it also costs him something. Well, as I solve the model, I end up assuming that there is no cost for land clearing, again, to solve my model. But anyway, so this ends up giving me the expected wealth maximization. So as you can see, there is this gamma threat of appropriation, which goes in the overall wealth maximization. So every period, his income is a little bit less, or he acts in a little bit more to save money because he's afraid that he's going to get his land taken away. So the main assumptions I want to talk about is just that I assume that there is no cost of land clearing, and also more importantly, that land clearing is irreversible. So it's possible that the farmer, after 20 years of cutting down the land, can go back to planting forests, but I don't consider that in this model. So now, basically he maximizes it, and I can come up with a Hamilton and everything, and it gives me the two equations. So I use these two equations to come up with the phase diagram. That's the only reason I put this up. So the first one is, where the price equals this cost of land clearing, and then the second one comes up with my wealth maximization. So what I get with those two equations when they intersect is that we approach this, there's this steady state path, and then we can get to L infinity, which is how much forest clearing will happen in this world where there's, this threat of appropriation. So the steady state, is where these two first order conditions equal. Okay, so what happens when we grant the property rights? Then this threat of appropriation gamma falls to 0. You have the right of your land. So instead of having the gamma factor, now we just have the effective discount rate R. So this is smaller than what we had before in the lack of property rights scenario. So that just makes our equation. So before we had the green one, and now we have the red line, which is steeper, but it intersects the L not equals 0 line sooner. So that's basically over here is where the steady state of property rights, is that we have more land allocated to forests compared to not having property rights. But in the saddle path, we can have property rights being greater or lower. I mean, the deforestation rate being higher or lower than before. So those are the two theorems that I have. The first one is what I stated, that in the steady state, property rights can make sure that we allocate more land to forest, but whatever that is, it can be that we have more deforestation in the short run. Okay, so what is it about Terra Legal that makes it a great program to study? Well, this was different from other titling efforts in Brazil. So in Brazil, this was the first kind of effort where it was federal, so it was at the national level, and there was this particular agency that was devoted to granting rights, and they look at satellite images, and they do a lot of data-centric things. So this was a streamlined registration process. They go on site, they look at the farmers, they make sure there's no land dispute. So they do a lot of cross-checking, which helps us. The controversial part of this was that it was transferred at little to no cost. So a lot of people were able to get the land for free. So the rollout started in mid-2009, and it says that if you were squatting on the land for at least 5 years, then you get the title. So before 2004, if you've been on the land for 5 years, then you get the title. And this is why they use the satellite images, because they want to make sure that you are actually there as you claim to be. So they only consider squatters before 2004. And this controversial pricing scheme, so there are like 3 different classes, but the farmers who, they have this size, which is a legal term, like modulo fiscais, but it's like 80, average is 80 hectares. So if your farm is really small, you can get it for free. If it's in a medium size, then you pay some price less than market price. However, they determine it. They don't say that. And then if it's above 4 modulo fiscai, then you have to get approved and pay market price. Again, I don't know what price they paid. I only know how much the land was registered. So the other thing is that it wasn't strictly a phased rollout. In the sense, it wasn't like they had a timetable and said, okay, here's where we're going first and then second and so forth. So if you were a farmer who was really impatient for the guys to come to your municipality, you could go to the headquarters and register yourself. But mostly this didn't happen because it was a lot of cost involved for them to go there. So if people waited for the officials to come and promote the scheme, and then the team investigated the land and so forth. So, and I find that there is this evidence of phased rollout in the data. And then the selection process for me is important because I rely on this for identification. So I say that they're not targeting areas with high deforestation or anything like that, right? So what I find out is that they are more concerned, this program was all about, having accountability. So this was part of Brazil's larger policies which are in place. So they want to see in the future, they have like a land registry, and it'll tell you, okay, this piece of land is under the environmental ministry and it's protected, or this piece of land is for indigenous property. And then all those land which no one is there, if they can now put a name to that parcel of land, they can say, oh, this guy is deforesting on his land and that is bad, and then he can face the consequences. I mean, that's how they kind of advertised it. And so what they did is they weren't looking so much at deforestation as just to make sure all the different areas of Brazil were registered. So and also the officials, did state when I talked to them in Brazil that they don't target areas with deforestation, but we always have to take what officials say with a grain of salt. So this is pretty key for my identification, and I believe it, but you might be skeptical. So the snapshot of registered area. So any of the red bits are where the property was registered. The dark green is the Amazon rainforest. And as we can see, I think it's about 3% of land that was registered. So not a lot, but still it was enough to make a difference in terms of wood exports. So the data, as I mentioned, the registration data was from the program. It gives me a lot of information on who registers it, where they register, what is the size, and so forth. But I aggregate that to the municipal level in order to do my analysis. And the export data is from the Brazilian Trade Ministry, and that's at the quarter level, and it tells you the value of the exported products, a different classification according to the harmonized system. So it's a 6-digit product classification. Okay, so what is the impact of Terra Legal on Brazilian exports? So now we have to put up our estimation equation, right? And then the second question I do is look at whether there is an evidence of heterogeneous rollout. So this supports my story that if we really intensify all of our cutting of the forest just to plant trees, then we can see it kind of will increase tremendously in a couple of quarters, and then it'll drop off. So the short run but tremendous increase in wood export would be that I'm cutting the land to use for agriculture. But if I'm doing it steadily, then we can say maybe they're doing a sustainable job, sustainable forest management. And then finally, because I do have this difference in the size of the property, I look whether that makes a difference or not. So this is the equation that I estimate. So my main effect, the treatment effect, is beta 1 post rollout. So the average post rollout effect within a municipality on export value. So that gives me, e to the beta 1 minus 1. And then I also look at these 3 other variables. So the log of total registered area, and then the log of area registered by medium farms and large farms. So these are elasticities. So it kind of tells me what is the additional effect of area registered in a municipality. And beta 3 and beta 4 tells you that if there's a 1% increase in area registered by medium and large farms, then that's kind of like you're increasing medium farms at the cost of increasing small farms. So that's kind of how we need to interpret those 2 effects. And of course, I have some controls. So I look at, mainly the municipal population estimates. So that's one control that I use, and that's available by municipality and by year, and also the total area that's cultivated. So those are the 2 controls that I use, but I mainly rely on my fixed effects. So I have a time trend, so that removes any changes because of time, any trends in the data. For instance, the crisis, right? We had the crisis recession, 2008, 2009. And then the eta IK is a product municipal fixed effect. So if a municipality decides to all of a sudden subsidize, wheat production, then this product fixed effect, a municipal product fixed effect will, remove that from the data. So that's why my effect is at the municipal level. So what happens within the municipality in a quarter on average. So here is my regression. So as you can see in the post rollout, so I'm already looking at the heterogeneous, effect of the rollout. So I have all the counties, and then I also restricted just to the counties which were eligible for registration. And then in the last 2 columns, it looks at whether or not the county was a consecutive exporter. Like, was it, is it typically an exporter? That's kind of the question with the last sample. And as we can see, there is a tremendous effect, like 0.53, and that translates to about like 48%. And then as you go over time, so in the first quarter, there's a positive effect. In the second quarter, it's a little bit larger, and the third quarter is even larger. And I do it for 10 quarters post rollout, but a lot of them become insignificant because only few of the properties were registered all the way in the beginning will have that much data. So I don't include all of those results because first you wouldn't be able to read anything, and second it wasn't significant. But it's a little easier to look at the picture maybe. So this looks at the effect of rollout on wood exports by quarter. Oh, unfortunately my x-axis got cut off. So here we have the first quarter after rollout, and then the second, and so forth. So we see an increase for the first 4 quarters, and then it starts going down. So this supports the theory that they get rid of the trees so that they can plant crops or do cattle ranching. And of course, I can test that with the agricultural product data, right? So that's what I do. So first, I actually consider all types of agricultural products, like planting agriculture, like where you plant, and then also animal-based and prepared food stuff. And it's only this animal-based exports which were significant and statistically significant. So that's the result I present. So here we can see that, in fact, it's this area, registered by medium farms. So these guys seem to be the one who are, intensifying their forest harvestation in order to do cattle ranching. It was also obvious in the previous picture. So this log medium farm registered area. So it says that if I increase the area registered in a municipality by these medium farms by like 10%, then that increases the export value by 1.3% on average, like within that municipality. So instead of, if it was the small farms, for instance, it wouldn't be an issue, but it's these medium farms which get their land for really cheap, and they have a small size. So these are the guys who look like they are intensifying forest exploitation. And then here, it's the same story. So they want to, instead do cattle ranching, which is very profitable, cattle ranching, because the demand for cattle is always high, especially now. And then in the second half of the sample, I consider just from the second quarter of 2008, because we had previously the, increase in demand with the crisis, before the crisis. So this is just to look at the post-crisis effect. So the effect is smaller because overall, like all the world, exports fell, like world trade decreased. So the effect is a little bit smaller there, but it's still the medium farms who have the most impact. So the conclusion that I have is that, based on the theoretical model, we see that, yes, we can have more forests allocated to the steady state in the long run. So this is probably a good thing for Brazil in maybe 30 years or 100 years. I don't know when we will reach steady state. So, without property rights, it would take longer for us to reach it, but at least now we know that they will allot more land to forest. But in the medium run, which is what we're concerned about, it's bad because we can, increase the rate of deforestation. So the model, is hopeful, but maybe not so hopeful for our current time period, and the data is a little depressing. So we find that there is this increase right after rollout, so people are very happy to have their rights so that they can invest in their land and grow more things and sell cattle and make money. And these middle-sized farms kind of have this Goldilocks effect because they are small enough that they can skirt under the radar, but big enough that they can actually have a lot of land for cattle ranching. So that is, I think, all that I have. And if people have more that they would like to know about, I can tell you. Yes?
So they deforest, they prepare the land for cattle, for example. What's the lag between when you see increase and export of meat versus deforestation?
So that's a very good question. So that's why I didn't put up this heterogeneous effect, because I don't see any effect with my data so far. So I think what I see is just a very immediate term. So I think in the future, maybe if I look at the data now, we can see that there's a much higher increase. But
Show some 48%.
no, so that one is just the trees.
But that's the trees. Yeah.
Right, but the animals themselves, I do see some increase, but it's very small, right? What I saw over here was like a 10% increase in registered area would lead to like a 0.4% increase. So it's quite small. But that's because especially with animal-based products, it'll take some time to make your animals grow. Right.
10 years.
Right. So the reason, because if I have the properties which are registered from 2009, those guys' effect will show up because they've been in the data long enough. But if it's something that got registered just in 2012, then their effect in this animal-based export will not show up because it's not enough time. But so this definitely is something based on the theoretical model. It'll be good to go back or go in now in the present, because this is until 2012, so I can even check now and then maybe 10 years and now whether any of the model effects come true or not. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm missing the point why you expect it to show up in trade data or in export. I mean, it's a small, medium-sized land ownership, wouldn't either the forest or the food products be consumed locally?
So that's a two-part question. So one I can answer by telling you why I look at exports. Okay, so, this is my computer. So the reason that I look at exports is because the agents have access to world market. So even, the small size firms, like those who are registered just in the size category 1, so they are probably consuming for themselves or for domestic production. But you have these medium-sized farms and big farms, so they don't just produce enough for themselves, they actually export that information, like that production. So on the one hand, like this, trade component will give us a more nuanced understanding, because where does this deforested wood end up? What about the agricultural exports? And also it helps me with the data, because if I look at just deforestation, which I do in another paper, where I don't look at the trade aspect, but just deforestation aspect, I only have annual data. So I don't have data on a quarterly level. So this gives me, more time to analyze the heterogeneous effect and so forth. And I also find that if we are in the trade, aspect, then we have overexploitation, even if we're compared to a closed economy. So the more precise estimation. But the other thing that you wanted to know about was the logging. So I'll show you. The logging industry is actually situated, well, maybe that's just the next section. So if you look at this graph, so this shows you all the points where we have the logging centers. So these are all big logging firms, and they send their product out of the country. And these are all the areas where I saw there was the registrations happening. So if you remember the picture with the red dots, like they pretty much overlap. I should have pulled up my other image, but let me see. Yeah, so this one is the snapshot, right? So they are all situated around the same area. So you would think that this is a very small thing and it doesn't affect exports, but they get better money if they export the product, right? The wood itself has a lot more demand abroad than it does within Brazil. And the agricultural products, that's why my effect in the agricultural product is not so strong. So I looked at cultivated products, like whatever they grow. The effect there was not in exports, but I had that effect, in my other paper that I co-authored. So I saw an effect there, just considering overall production without exports. But in the timber, there is the effect. Did I answer your question? You're still not convinced about the story? But we do see an increase in the data. I definitely find that there is an increase following this program, right, in exports. So clearly there is some, export that's happening, and that's even just considering the legal data, right? This is the customs data that's officially reported by the government. So illegal logging and so forth will not really enter there, though that happens. So, any
other questions? Yeah, Sarah?
I was thinking that it's a sad story, isn't it, from the tragedy commons perspective? What went wrong? Was it just the price mechanism?
Yes.
Or
So the problem is, remember, in our model, we have this price that's given to the farmer for saving the forest, but in reality, no one is paying a farmer in Amazon for keeping the trees on his land. So that's the issue, is that price is essentially zero. So it's better for them to clear the land and get the land, so get the agricultural income stream. So I think, if I had to make a policy recommendation, I would say that now that you know who owns the land, it'll be easy for you to give him a payment for keeping the trees on his land. So we need to start actually paying the people for the service that they, do for the whole world, global warming, all this stuff, climate change. If he's cutting down the trees because he doesn't have food, then that's an issue. If he can be paid to maintain the trees, that would be better. The way that the part that I didn't mention is the way the government tried to go about it is they ordered everyone to maintain an 80% legal reserve of forest on their land. So it said, if you have a land through this property rights, 80% of your land should be covered by forest, and only 20% can be cultivated. And then they want you to do, forest management sustainably, like you take this 80% and then you can sell it by year and grow land. But what I found is, first, there was not really that much enforcement. So when I was in Brazil, I saw a farm of a guy, which was a small area, and there were no trees really. And he said, oh, there was a fire, and it all went away. And then they were like, I went with the officials, right? They were like, oh, okay, fire. So people aren't so much worried that they're going to get, penalized for it. So I think it would be better if we pay them. And a lot of programs now, they're trying to do that with all this, transfer from, direct transfer from the developed world back into the developing world, like through RED and RED Plus initiatives. But hopefully this will help them there, but so far I haven't seen anything. And in fact, since my research, which ends in 2012, there's been a lot of news in 2016 and 17 that the deforestation has increased in the Amazon. So more evidence.
I have a couple of conceptual questions.
Yeah.
First is about property rights. Well, there are property rights and then there are property rights. My question is that, is there any kind of indication how secure those property rights are in Amazon, in Brazil? How credible is the commitment from the government? I guess, like, from the point of view of farmers or squatters, they may have a perception that those property rights were kind of given to them, but they could be also taken away, which might create sort of opportunistic behavior vis-a-vis sort of more long-term, kind of thinking. I don't know, do you want to comment on that? Or?
So I know that there will not be a threat from the government. Okay. So in Brazil, that's, it's even written into their constitution about this land titling and so forth. So they really believe in giving people rights to the land, and there have been many programs in the past which have done it. They just haven't done it very efficiently. So that's where this Terra Legal was better, because they were doing it more efficiently. In terms of violent land grabbing from people who were there, like, they want to just take the land, I think it's possible that you can have that, but these, titles are enough for them to take it, to court. But of course, a poor farmer will not really be able to take it to court. So it's a good point. Maybe the threat of appropriation doesn't fall completely to zero, but it'll be something less than what it was before. But they at least feel secure enough in their land that they did increase investment in their land. So if they were thinking this is a joke, we wouldn't see that they're investing so much in the land. So they went and applied for a loan based on their title so that they can buy a water pump or do some other improvement to their land. But that's a good point. It's, you know, in violent land grabbing is a fact of life there in the Amazon. So
And another conceptual question is about, since your title says under free trade, Brazil itself is a very mercantilist, protectionist country, and I assume that there's also reciprocity vis-à-vis Brazilian exports, certainly for meat. I mean, there are tariffs, there are no-tariff barriers. It's heavily protectionist market for the trade. I don't know about the wood products. I'm looking specifically at the wood tariffs and wood products. So is it really appropriate to call it free trade?
well, you are probably correct that maybe it's, you know, maybe I should have said trade under current conditions, but I think definitely trade, you know, today, at least used to be, or when I was analyzing it, was more free than the current, you know, climate. So, but I think in terms of wood, I don't think that they have any tariffs, but I could be mistaken. It's possible though that the countries which are trying to limit wood products from the Amazon could put a tariff, but there's at least nothing.
Less likely protected than agricultural products, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Unless you know,
That's a valid point. I shall look up what is exactly the tariff situation.
Start targeting, you know, that kind of products because they are, you know, not good for the environment or something like this.
Right.
Yeah.
To follow up from that, actually it might affect Brazil in their ability to sell the CO2 emission rights, which shows up in trade balance as well.
Do you mean for the rights to maintain the forest?
After the Kyoto Protocol, the developing countries had the right to sell to the developing countries the amount of CO2
Right.
that they are
Yes.
using. But,
Yes.
But if you I guess I don't know too much about it, but you might want to take a look. It might affect if you cut down the Amazon rainforest, then would there still be an argument for the developed countries to grant
Yes.
the CO2 quota to Brazil at the extent that it has?
Sure. Yeah.
And just like one side comment, I think the question I asked, you could fix it very easily instead of free trade.
Just put
freer trade.
freer trade.
It's probably there has been a liberalization, right?
Yes, there has been that, and you know, they are still part of the World Trade Organization and everything. But yeah, I get your point. Yes.
I have just some sort of background questions. So you mentioned it's just about like 3% that the land was actually registered, and I find it really interesting that, you know, the logging and registrations are happening in the same area. I'm not that familiar with the situation of like Brazil land rights, but I remember, I think it was an African situation, there was some sort of discussion on these existing corporations kind of like, not necessarily pushing, but facilitating that land registration in African context. And I was just wondering, perhaps you can comment there as well, like, do you think it's farmers taking advantage of the logging industry nearby, or is it also that the logging industry, you know, introduces them the possibility to register, the kind of, you know, they have a very clear incentive.
So there's definitely a symbiosis, I guess you could say, where if the logging industry is there, they can tell the farmer, you know what, let me just clear that for you free of charge, and I'll just get rid of the wood, and you can do what you will. But I think because you don't just have the small farms that register, you also have these medium and large farms. So those large properties, I think it could be these logging, industry. So they are registering as well, not just the farmers. And
but why was it just 3%?
well, that's what I have until 2012. Okay. They have been registering more, so I just don't have data. And attempts to follow up were not successful. So that's why, and from 2009 to 2012, it was 3%. And that's 3% of the whole Amazon rainforest. So in some counties, it was, much higher percentage of land that was registered than in other counties. But so this includes, remember, like all of this land, they are only giving rights to the land where no one has any claim to it. So if there are parts of land which are protected by the environmental agency, no one can register in those parcels, or if it is, for the indigenous people, then that's also protected by another agency, so you cannot register there. So this is, they go around to different agencies being like, do you have any access, or do you have any claim here? And then if you don't, then they go and register it. So, but yes, there is more registration that happened. So it was ongoing as of 2017. I'm not sure after that what happened. But.
Other questions?
We're starting to ask about pricing in that time period. What happened to timber prices in the period as we were recovering from the recession?
There is the effect on timber prices. So I look at value of exports, you're right. So I also look at just the net weight of exports. And I do see that there is a effect also on net weight. Maybe it's slightly smaller. But the timber prices fluctuated because first you had the recession and then you recovered. So I think, is this one? Okay, this is just the articles of wood. Where is it? This is the net weight. Okay. So here you can look at what happens to the net weight. And the numbers are slightly smaller. I think in the value it was 0.586, and now just looking at net weight, there's still an increase of 0.486. So it's pretty comparable, I think. The medium farm effect looks lower. So I did not want to, get into what happens to the price, because first I only have the value. Of course, I can back out the price because I have the net weight and the value, so I can find out what happens to the price, but I did not concentrate on that aspect. But good question.
General question, why do you study Brazil, or why Amazon? What's the motivation for that?
Well, it's one of those things where it worked out that way because the professor who got the original access to the data, so she did her research on Brazil, and when I was looking for my topic, like we first did the co-author paper, then I asked her if I can use the data because I was in the trade sector. So that's how it worked out. But of course, I've been very interested in environmental economics, and those questions are now more relevant than ever. So I didn't really question it. I was like, oh, I have data and I have something interesting that happened and I can do something cool. So that's where it went. I don't know any Portuguese, so I struggled in Brazil. I had to hire a translator and go around, and it was quite difficult. So in that sense, it wasn't very easy. It could have been easier somewhere else, but I don't think that property rights changes happen often. So it was nice that it did take place. So.
And another question is, what are your plans with this paper? Are you planning to publish it somewhere, or are you in the process of publishing somewhere? How is this?
I do have an intention to publish it. So when I finished my thesis, my advisors were pretty optimistic about its chances. Mm-hmm. So I unfortunately had to take a couple of years hiatus because of my kid. But I need to figure out how, because it's very sprawling and there's so much information. So I'm in the process of trying to figure out what is relevant and how to cut it down. But I think I will try first in like the International Trade Journal, but and then move on to see maybe Land Use Journal might be better. So I'm not sure. But yes, I would like to publish it. And I guess the reason that I was a little bit maybe not so anxious to publish it is because no one has my data. So no one else can reproduce this because I got the confidential data on the one hand, and also this terra legal data was another hand. So in that sense, I can publish it and no one is going to beat me on it. But we were first concentrating on the other paper, which we just published January. So this is the next step. So.
And looking forward, let's say like the next sort of 5 years, what are your plans in terms of research? Do you plan to continue investigating Amazon and Brazil?
Well, I wanted to give this topic at least a break. I think I could revisit it in another 10 years. It might be more interesting just to see if things have changed. But I am still interested in looking at environmental economics and topics along those lines, so trade and environment. But I don't have something specific in mind. I mean, I have a notebook where sometimes when I get the idea, I put it down, but nothing is developed beyond the beginning stages. But I would definitely, I think there's a lot of research to be done in this field, in terms of economics and environment. So, but I mean, I have the network, right? So if it's always easier when you know people who know people to get access to certain data. So in developing world, like that's the difficulty. You need to have the contacts to get your data. But
okay, so thank you all for coming, and thanks to you for
thank you.
Let's give it a round.
Thank you.